Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I want to do a quick comparison and contrast video on these two guys. This is the Spyderco Knives Smock, and this is the Smock Knives SK23. Both by the same designer, Kevin Smock, but very, very different. This is a custom knife down here, and this is a production, knife from the Spyderco Taichung factory. So, full disclosure, this guy was sent to me from Spyderco. I told him, I've got that full disclaimer everywhere else. You've heard it before, but nevertheless, not letting that affect my review here. This guy on the bottom here was purchased from Smock Knives. In fact, I prepaid the entire cost of the knife a long time ago, like 2 years and 10 months ago, and I finally got this knife about a month ago. So there was a long gap in there. It was delivered about 2 years after it was promised, after I paid full price up front. Now, I don't believe Smock is a bad guy fundamentally, but I think he got in way over his head, and as a result, it took him a long time to dig out. But nevertheless, I freely admit that left a really bad taste in my mouth. And so that's probably colored my viewpoint on this knife, and I'm doing my best not to let that happen, but as such, this is probably going to be the only video you see this guy in the channel. But anyways, there you go. But that's where these guys are coming from. But long after Smock had done all that and, taken a bunch of pre-orders, Spyderco actually announced, he and Spyderco announced this production version, which is very similar in a lot of ways. It has his button compression lock. It has his front-mounted flipper sort of affair. There are a lot of similarities between these two knives, although they are very, very clearly different. And today, what I just want to do is talk about those similarities and differences. We'll talk about areas where the production has the advantage, areas where the custom has the advantage, and areas where there's pretty much a tie. One of the big areas where the production, we'll start on production, has an advantage is actually in weight. If we look at the weight of this guy comes in at 3.7 ounces. And that is, by the way, for, let's see here, a little less than 3.5 inches of blade. Compare that to the custom, which is coming in at 4.48 ounces, and is coming in just a hair over 3 inches worth of blade. So what we find is that the production knife is lighter for a larger blade and larger overall knife. That's definitely a downside. And one part of the reason that it is so much lighter is that the stock thickness is way, way thinner. If you look on the original production Smock here, the stock is crazy thick. I'll see if I can measure this out here. We are coming in right around 4.04 millimeters or 0.158 inches. These are not exactly calibrated and whatnot, but nevertheless, this has got some really thick stock, as opposed to on the Spyderco model, where we're coming in here closer to 0.11. That's much, well, I'm sorry, 0.12, closer to. Rounding is hard. But anyways, so the stock thickness makes a major difference, and it doesn't, certainly a good grind is more important than good stock thickness, but the thing is, it definitely does play a role in cutting things like apples, a closed cell foam, etc. Actually, that brings us to the next point, which is the grind. One frustrating element is that the production and custom knives are actually just about, the production is slightly better ground than the custom. What I mean by that is that the production knife is just as thin behind the edge, and in fact is thinner toward the tip out there. That's not something I'm particularly loving. It feels like there's a little bit of a hollow grind in the production version, whereas this guy seems to be a full flat grind. And again, so that's just going to mean that the cutting performance, especially given the blade stock here, is going to be at very, 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 very best equal, whereas on custom knives, generally, you want a really nice grind. So that's not a great thing. One thing that might be a legal benefit for some people is the fact that if I press this button on the production knife, there is a second detent, as you can see in my disassembly, that prevents it from just flopping open, as opposed to on the custom guy here, where if I press this button, it drops on out. Now, look, that's super satisfying. I like that element of it a lot, but for some people in some stupid states, there are laws on the books against gravity knives, which I don't know how that became illegal. I don't know how any of these things, well, actually, yeah, I do. Lawmakers stirring fear in the populace to try and gain control over the, oh, I'm sorry. Did I say that out loud? Anyways, I digress. There are gravity knife statutes to which that might apply to this guy here, and might not to this guy. I've heard rumors that you can remove that second detent ball and regain some of that, but that is definitely something you keep in mind. One other thing on the Spyderco here is that this has the hole, and so you actually have the option to open it in an alternative way with one hand, to open it slower, and again, this can be helpful around scared people, whereas with this guy, the only other option you have is two-hand open, like that, which is fine. And then finally, the production one is much more readily available. At the moment, actually, they're sold out, but I assume they're going to be coming back in, and hopefully there's not a 2-year plus wait for them. So, anyways, I digress. So, to me, those are the things where the production, oh, and I'm sorry, the biggest one, of course, is the price. How did I leave that off? The price on the production model is about $160. The price on the custom model, at least when I paid it, was $600. The full price, yeah. So that's a major, substantial difference. Oh my God! And so that is the biggest change. So the advantages in production come from the price, the fact that delivery is a lot easier. You have that alternate opening action. It doesn't drop free, which might be legally meaningful to some people with really stupid lawmakers afoot. You have a nicer grind, if not an equivalent grind. It's nicer at the tip on the production version. The stock thickness is much more reasonable, and it is a lighter weight knife overall. They are about tied in a couple of areas. In terms of clip, both of the clips are good. The Smock clip here is very much, it looks like a spatula of some variety or another. It works great, though. I'll say that 100%. This is a fine clip with good ramp and whatnot. And ergonomically speaking, maybe it's a little bit better than the Spyderco version, whereas the Spyderco has a, big, tall spoon clip here. And its biggest issue is that it is a little big and tall, ergonomically speaking. You definitely feel it, but both of the clips work just fine. That's not a big issue. Both of them have the best thing about this knife, which is the button-based compression lock flipper, as well as this front-mounted tab. That's just amazing on both of them. And detent-wise, these two knives are roughly equivalent, so those aren't really a concern. So that's where they're tied, is that the clips on both are good. Both have the best thing, which is the button compression lock flipping with this front-based tab, and the detent on them is about equivalent. On the custom side, there are some advantages. To me, personally, the custom's a little more ergonomic, in that you've got less going on. I mean, on the Spyderco one, you've got a big clip, you got holes, you got edges, you got versus on this guy, it's just sort of a slightly contoured piece of metal here. And so it just works really well in the hand. You've got a really nice finger choil on this. And by the way, that is one important thing to remember with this is, look, right up here, you have this area where the button lock compression lock goes. And in order for the blade to fit in the handle, it needs to go in a hollow in the blade. So this finger choil, or this choil up here, are kind of mandatory for this whole process to work. It doesn't work without it. But I have to say, I much prefer the shape of the custom finger choil rather than this weird bearded axy looking thing on the production one. I really wish they'd done differently than that, because So I definitely like the choil better, and the ergos are a little better anyways. Size-wise, I do prefer the custom. But I like smaller knives. This should be no shock to anybody. So there you go. The pivot screw on the custom is very nice. You can see here it is not only a kind of tri-winged pivot, but one with an actual Torx in the middle of it. But it's also nicely machined with little holes in there. I mean, the pivot is a nice little detail here. The closing action on it is just astoundingly good. It is completely and totally free dropping shut, because when you've got this button pressed down, there is literally nothing touching the blade except ball bearings and pivot. That's good. The closing action has always been the most satisfying element of this knife, and it definitely is satisfying. I prefer the Wharncliffe style blade shape over this all belly sort of non-committal Warny thing. For me, this blade has never done it for me. I think this knife would just look a lot cooler with the original shape, but whatever. And then finally, I think this the custom version is just a lot simpler. It feels a little bit more like a simple tool, whereas this guy is trying to do a bunch of style stuff that I don't necessarily get. So to me, those are the advantages with the custom, is that it's a simpler overall design. It has a nicer blade shape. The closing action is way better. It does, by the way, do that drop-free thing, which for some people might be a benefit, because you can actually just press the button down and use your wrist to get this out of there. So, that's something to keep in mind. It has a great pivot screw. It's a nicer size for my taste. It has a better finger choil, and it is much more ergonomic than the production. Final conclusions, that's kind of hard for me to say, because they're vastly different. I mean, custom $160 production knife made overseas versus a $600 custom knife, that's a difference. That's a big old difference. They are vastly different knives. The price is different, but there are some unexpected wins on both sides. The fact that the grind is roughly equivalent on the custom and the production is not ideal for the custom, but it's actually a really good sign for the production. The fact that the action is better on the custom relative to the production wasn't actually something I anticipated. And like I said, it may actually be better if you remove that inner spring, but it is what it is. I didn't even think about the gravity knife issue until, that's my assumption, is why that second detent is there. But still, it is definitely something to want to keep in mind, legally speaking. And, I think that there are areas where both of these can help. For instance, I'd love for Smock to start using, blade thickness, or I'm sorry, blade stock that's a little more reasonable. And I really do hope that, Spyderco in a future version might adopt the actual blade shape with the Warney, as well as the choil shape, just to make this a lot more ergonomic. And a little bit of simplicity in design would go a long way. I don't know. But anyways, and I hope as well that Smock ends up doing, more rapid deliveries, lowering prices, those kinds of basic things as well. But anyways, there you go. That's a contrast between two very, very different knives with a very, very similar sole. Hope you found this interesting to you, that I wasn't smocking you upside the head too much with these differences. This didn't turn out to be a total Smockdown, and that you have yourselves just an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.